afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the technical forum of the Hydrogen Fuel Cells and Batteries Group exhibit here in Hanover 2018. This afternoon we have some very exciting program, and we're going to kick it off with a presentation on batteries and hydrogen, a comparative analysis of infrastructure and costs. So I invite all of you to take a seat, enjoy a drink on us, and settle down to listen to this interesting topic by Dr. Thomas Grube, who's a group leader transport at the Forschungszentrum Jülich. So if all of you guys could join me in welcoming him, I'm sure we'll have a really interesting afternoon. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Helen, for your introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to have been invited to this talk on infrastructures. So this is the topic that I want to bring a bit closer to your attention. So it's not about the fuel cell vehicles, it's not about the hydrogen vehicles, the battery vehicles, it's about the infrastructures. So what we wanted to know as one point of intensive discussion is always the infrastructure topic. We wanted to know, what about the battery vehicles? So we did a lot of assessments in the past on hydrogen infrastructures for vehicles, and we wanted to do the same and bring this in line with the topic of battery charging infrastructures. So where do I come from? I come from the Institute of Electrochemical Process Engineering in Jülich, the Forschungszentrum Jülich. The head of our institute is Professor Dr. Detlef Stolten, and I myself, I'm with the Department of Process and Systems Analysis, which is headed by Dr. Martin Rubinius, and I'm responsible, like Helen just said, for the transport team. The story of our motivation for this study is quickly told. So basically we know that the transportation sector is responsible for a large share of greenhouse gas emissions. And on the other hand, you see this on the top in the middle, this small figure shows that the contribution of the transportation sector to greenhouse gas emissions reduction is rather scarce. So there was not much progress in the recent 20 years. And that's why we think this is still a very strategic issue in tackling these greenhouse gas emissions in this sector. And that's why we took the two technologies that allow us for zero-emission transport in the future, and these are the battery electric vehicles, but also the fuel cell electric vehicles, which are emission-free, at least on the local level, and which have a good chance to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the case that renewable power sources will dominate in the future electricity market. So that's why the research question that we have put here is what are the actual costs, what are the energy demands, and what are the emissions of a system that provides hydrogen vehicles and battery electric vehicles with electricity or hydrogen. So what we did, so what you see here is the steps of assessment that we have taken. So at the first we took a look into the literature. So we did a meta-analysis of almost 80 studies, looked into scenarios. We looked then into the in-depth details, so in the detail, so to speak, of infrastructure designs. And we did this for the example of a case study for Germany. We then developed a consistent framework together with our supporter, which is the H2 Mobility Germany, and looked into different market penetration scenarios. So basically a very small market penetration, so 100,000 vehicles, then 1 million vehicles, and finally 20 million vehicles. And during the preparation of the study, we also have put some intermediate points with 3, 5, and 10 million vehicles for each of these hydrogen or battery electric vehicles. Then we did the spatially and temporally resolved analysis. So we used a couple of models that we have developed over the past, and we did finally the assessment of investment, fuel cost, and also emissions. What is the status quo? So in terms of hydrogen refueling infrastructure, you see that we have, in terms of the number of vehicles worldwide, there have been sold 6,500 vehicles between 2013 and 17. We have at present 213 public hydrogen fueling stations in operation by the end of 2016. And the major share is for Japan with 44%, then followed by the US and by Germany. What are the plans for Germany? So right now we have, I looked into the H2 Mobility app this morning, we have 43 hydrogen refueling stations in operation. Another 37 are planned or under construction. And the target, which probably most of you know, is the 400 HRS before 2023. Of course, there's also other infrastructure components available. So, for example, a variety of projects or of pipeline systems are available worldwide, which means that the technology of providing infrastructure to a customer is not very new. So we can learn from these available infrastructures as well. The status quo for the electric charging. On a worldwide basis, we had 2 million vehicles by the end of 2016. Which were largely concentrated in China. Probably most of you know that. This was also followed by the United States. Of course, these are absolute numbers. If you would transfer them into numbers per capita, this would look completely different. But in terms of the absolute values, China is here in the leading position. Okay, so what did we do? So we have, as I said, a model portfolio that we applied for this study. So we looked into the electricity market, we looked into the demand of hydrogen or of electricity for the charging infrastructure, and we combined a lot of these models in order to come to a conclusion for this study. In terms of the hydrogen infrastructure, you see the basic methodology that we have applied here. So you see on the right-hand side that we have done this on a spatially resolved manner, so to speak. So we have a geospatial database which tells us where are actually the hydrogen sources located, basically in the north, because we took a scenario which is, from today's perspective, a little further in the future. And we see that in future the candidate region for hydrogen provision might be in the north, because there we have the large amounts of wind power that we could earn, so to speak, and that we could use in terms of surplus electricity, which could not be consumed in the grid for the production of hydrogen. So the sources are mainly located in the north of the country, but we have also defined a lot of spots over the country to show that there is also local or regional potential for hydrogen provision. On the other hand, we have a large technology database. So for all the infrastructure components like pipelines, like compressors, like liquefiers, and so on, we have a large overview on available technologies and their performance characteristics, so to speak, in terms of efficiency, in terms of cost, and so on. What is also important to understand is that I said that the electricity mix is dominated by renewable power, so around 80% of the electricity is coming from renewables. And if you look on this picture here on the right-hand side, you see that one must differentiate between the actual renewable electricity use at the point of hydrogen production, and on the other hand, if it comes to the assessment of the infrastructure components which are distributed over the country, then you typically look into the normal, so to speak, electricity grid. That means at this level you also have greenhouse gas emissions to consider, because there is an electricity mix. So only for the hydrogen production we take pure, so to speak, renewable electricity, and on the level below, so to speak, so in the electricity grid level, then we have a mix of different power sources. What is also important to understand is that for the very small market penetration of 100,000 vehicles and 1 million vehicles, we did not say that this is pure electricity from renewables. This is then taken by SMR, so steam methane reforming hydrogen, and on the other hand, it could also be byproduct hydrogen. So just to show that there's other options available right now, but these options may be exhausted in the future on the one hand, and also they would not help us in extending the CO2-free sources, so to speak. Only in the 20 million FCEV market penetration, we say that this hydrogen then comes purely from surplus electricity from the renewable power sector. The hydrogen is then stored on the large scale in caverns. This is typical, or this could be a typical solution for Germany, that hydrogen can be stored underground at very low cost. This might not be true for all the regions worldwide, but here we have the opportunity for this low-cost storage option. And then subsequently, the hydrogen is transported either with gaseous hydrogen trailers, with hydrogen pipelines, or with trucks that transport liquefied hydrogen. And it could also be a mixture, so to speak, of hydrogen transmission pipelines into the region of the country, and then subsequently delivered from a hub, so to speak, to the fueling station with a truck. So this mix is also possible. Already the results. So in terms of the cumulative investment, you see the values that we have determined in our study. I would go only into the values for the large market penetration scenario, 20 million vehicles. And you see that here the range is from 40 billion to 46 billion euros as the total investment that would be required. And you see also that the lowest investment estimate is true for the pipeline trailer combination, so pipeline to a hub and then from the hub a subsequent trailer transportation of the hydrogen to the fueling station. Coming to the battery electric vehicle charging, so here we have estimated the requirement or the demand for the different levels of charging stations, so M1, M2, M3, M4. M1 and M2 are, so to speak, the overnight chargers, so people can charge their vehicle overnight in their own garage, but also on the vehicle, on the road. This is an assumption for this. And then, most importantly, we have also a fleet of city chargers, mode 4, which is really fast charging, up to 350 kilowatt of charging power. And also we have the same type of charging stations also on the motorway. And we have also here a distributed demand of the electricity over the country, which is shown on the right-hand side. What is important now is that in the first two scenarios, so 100,000 and 1 million vehicles, we have a 1-by-1, so that means each vehicle has an overnight charging station. But if we go to the higher market penetration, we assume that not every vehicle can have an own overnight charging anymore, so these vehicles then rely on a public charging infrastructure. So here's the investment. So on the upper figure, you see that the largest estimate is around 50 billion euro for Germany, and the lower estimate is not shown here, but this is in the range of 40 billion euros, and the per vehicle assumption goes down from 3,000 euros per vehicle down to 2,500 euros per vehicle. And finally, so I've shown these figures already. As we're running out of time, I will show you what are the fuel cost estimates from our study. So you see that in the end, so for the large penetration scenario, the costs are almost equal. So something like 4.5 to 4.6 euro cents per kilometer. And you see also that in the beginning we have higher cost estimate for the hydrogen refueling infrastructure. And then we have this gap here at this stage where we have the shift from the SMR hydrogen and byproduct hydrogen to the pure renewable electricity case where the expenses get a bit higher, and then this goes down again to the level where we are also for the battery vehicles. And as the final result, this is the estimate for the greenhouse gas emissions. So you see on the hydrogen side, we have something like 2.7 grams per kilometer, and on the battery vehicle side, we have 21 grams per kilometer. Both values are substantially below the European target for 2020 of 95 grams per kilometer. So you see that really there is the option of drastically reducing these emissions. And on the other hand, the second message from this picture is that only the hydrogen actually has the ability to take up a large quantity or a large share of the renewable electricity better than the battery electric vehicles, because these are typically relying on the grid. So, and the final slide, hydrogen and control charging, which I did not went deeply into it, are the key to integrating renewable electricity on the one hand. And what we say is that the complementary rollout of these infrastructures would be beneficial because we have advantages of both sides, so on the battery side, but also on the fuel cell side, in terms of cost and efficiency, of course. So that's why we say the total cost would not be too high for an economy like ours, in particular not if we go over a long range of time until 2050, for example. And with this, I would like to close and thank you for your attention.
And thank you so much, Dr. Grube. At this point, if we have any questions from the audience, please just put your hand up and I can bring the microphone over to you. No need to be shy here. This is the opportunity to talk to him. Although, of course, if you have any further questions that you don't think of at the moment, you can visit him at booth D68.
Yes.
Thank you. I find it astonishing that the CO2 production is 10 times higher for battery electric vehicles than for hydrogen-driven vehicles. Can you point it out a little bit further?
The reason for this is that we rely for the battery electric vehicle charging exclusively on the grid electricity, which is always a mix of different power sources, renewable ones, but also fossil ones, also in the long term. And the hydrogen production is really assumed, at least for this study, to be purely based on surplus electricity from renewable power. So that's why this is a bit a lower footprint in terms of the carbon intensity.
Thank you. Thank you for the going into details also in the on the cost. My name is Marieke Rijt. I represent the European Hydrogen Association. First of all, I think your study should have way more visibility than it has had so far. I picked up on it. It's on our website as well a few weeks ago only, because I think especially your conclusions too should help us set the tone in the next EU funding scheme in the coming 7 years. These kind of analysis we really need to underpin any big programs. I want your comment on how we could indeed look for more integration between the two infrastructure deployment strategies. Because, as you know, only in Germany we have a combined program for electric mobility. On EU level, this is all separated in different programs. We see a kind of Wild West in recharging infrastructure deployment. The same actually with hydrogen stations. Anybody who has a good proposal right now can implement a station in one of the programs. How would you see the integration go forward? Is there any practical advice you can give? Where would you see this? Thank you.
So maybe not from an immediate perspective. So what we see is that, like you just pointed out, there is separate worlds, so to speak, that do not talk very much with each other. What this study should show is that on the one hand, of course, the customer will finally be the one that decides on which car to take or which technology to select. On the other hand, it is an issue to think about what would be best for an energy economy. And this is what also this study points out. So if you really want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is really more a societal goal than a target of personal investment, so to speak, then you should do both, actually. So both of these infrastructures. Of course, it might be a bit a difficult message that an energy economy should invest in both of these infrastructures, because then the cost almost double, so to speak. That's why I say it's not a very simple message, but maybe it's the one to go for, because both of these technologies have their pros and cons, and really talking from the energy system perspective, maybe the hydrogen is a bit in favor of what we think, because there we have, on the one hand, the inherent storage. So the storage is really a part of this system, and on the other hand, we have a variety of other consumers, like industry, like maybe even households that might take up this hydrogen. So there's a lot of issues which I could not go into in this short presentation, but basically these issues have to be considered. What might be a bit different from your European perspective, so we had really a good echo in the media on this study. So there were really many articles in print, for example, or in particular, on this study, and we had a lot of presentations in the past, let's say 3 to 4 months. So the echo was really good for us, but maybe, as you point out, not on the European level. But it's the study, the study is written in English. It's freely available for download. So if you're interested, just let me know.
Great, and thank you once again, Dr. Grube. If there's any other questions, feel free to head by booth D68, and I'm sure he would love to talk to you more. Our next presentation will be up in just a moment. Thank you.